Hey guys, welcome back to the show. We have a great episode for you for the last episode of 2023. Can you even believe it? So we're over 200 episodes now, which is pretty exciting in the podcast world. And our final episode of the year actually is talking about a topic that is pretty well kind of discussed in the functional space and in the biohacking world, but is still very controversial in conventional medicine. And I'm talking, of course, about ozone and ozone therapy. So my guest today, Micah Lowe, is an expert in this area. He's got an incredible website with incredible resources. There are so many realms within the field of medicine that remain underappreciated, and ozone therapy is definitely one of those. Ozone therapy is an alternative medical treatment that introduces ozone or ozonides to the body. And it does this in a multitude of different ways, which is interesting because you can't just sit and breathe in ozone. It'll make you sick. But today, I'm with Micah Lowe, and we navigate the science behind this unique approach and the numerous studies and clinical trials that support ozone therapy's effectiveness, despite not having FDA approval and being stigmatized by conventional medicine. We explore its potential as a catalyst for engaging our body's intelligence and how it's applied across a diverse range of areas from dentistry to skincare. Ozone therapy is a fascinating alternative treatment that has the potential to revolutionize the way we view health and well-being. Now, we have a special offer for you guys. You can get 10% off anything on the Simply O3 website just by using code NATNIDDAM at checkout. And NIDDAM is NIDDAM at checkout. So NATNIDDAM at checkout. Now, you can find out more about Micah Lowe on Instagram. His handle is at Micah for Health, the word for. And then the website, like I just said, is simplyO3.com. Let's jump into the episode and learn about ozone. Hey, folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider. Welcome to the show, Micah Lowe. It is a pleasure to re-meet you today after connecting a few times this spring.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to talk about ozone therapy, whatever else we talk about. But yeah, like I was saying, I really appreciated connecting with you too. You're just a very kind, genuine person, and obviously deliver a lot of good educational value to your audience as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I feel the same. I think that it didn't take much convincing on either of our parts to say, okay, we need to have a conversation about ozone together. So I'm really excited because actually, although we only just met a couple of months ago, you've been on my radar for a while. And it's just, I actually think at some point in the last couple of years, I walked by your booth and said, oh, ozone, I really want to do a podcast about that. And you said, yeah, let's do it. And then I vanished into the ether as we do at these conferences. So I'm glad that this time we actually really connected and made this happen. So, Micah, you are in many ways the man to talk to about ozone therapy, which I'm super excited about because ozone's one of these topics that is vast. A lot of people make a lot of claims about ozone. It's a very exciting area. I was just saying to you, I just did a poke around on PubMed. I just typed in ozone therapy and I was blown away by not only the number of articles, but the many, many different applications it's being studied for. So, without me rambling on about this too much, maybe you could just talk to us a little bit about ozone. I know it's a family thing in your world. But maybe talk to us a little bit about this ozone business and anything you think would give us a good platform to spring off of here.
Yeah, I think it's kind of an interesting topic because like you said, there's a lot of research on it. So when I first got into it, there's over 1,800 medical studies on it. They range in credibility. So not all of them are like, oh, these are double blinds and done really, really well. But there definitely is a theme there. And now there's over 2,500 medical studies done on ozone therapy. And it does have the double blind with the control and clinical trials that have been done. And it has, on the science side, a good amount of credibility for it and what it works for. So it's kind of interesting that it's one of those therapies that is demonized by conventional medicine. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that comes from stigma. So ozone, a lot of people might be aware that you can't actually breathe ozone, because in cities like LA or New York, they'll say the ozone level is such and such today, which is tied to a negative thing. And the reason for that is because you can't breathe ozone. So our lungs don't have this antioxidant buffering system. If the ozone goes in there, it oxidizes the lung tissue, but it can be safely used in a lot of different ways, because there's an antioxidant buffering system, which essentially protects the cells from oxidation, and it creates a beneficial cascade effect. So it's kind of interesting in that there's so much behind it, so much clinical research, so much social credibility. There are tens of thousands of doctors using it on a regular basis. And it still is just one of those things that's kind of left out there as like, oh, that's weird, or that doesn't work. Oh, it's fake. And that is usually coming from people that just don't know about it. But it's one of those things that's definitely kind of in the alternative health space, because it has not been FDA approved today. But that being said, I just find it fascinating because it can be used in so many different disciplines. So there's 4 primary ones. There's medical, which would be like the IVs. You can do rectal or vaginal insufflation, which isn't very glamorous, but it does work pretty well for issues pertaining to those areas, and some other things. Then you have like joint injections. So it can be used in regenerative joint injections, and kind of, it wouldn't be a replacement for stem cells or anything like that, but it's a much cheaper alternative to try out, see if it's going to help with a herniated disc, see if it's going to help with a tendon tear. And it is pretty successful in that. So there's Dr. George Kramer, people can look up to find. You look like you're going to ask something off that.
Yeah, I need to back up like 3 statements ago.
Sure. Yeah.
So how does it, like, for example, for injecting into joints, what is it that the ozone's doing? Like, that's pretty fascinating, right? How is it? Do we understand, or do you understand? Is there any kind of level of understanding in terms of how it's helping with the joints? For example?
Yeah. So ozone, just real quick, is a gas. So oxygen is O2, ozone is O3. So we're applying a medical grade ozone gas somewhere into the body. And so any application you do, it's going to be a medical grade ozone gas that goes into the body. But essentially what it's doing is it's causing a mild stress to the body. So for example, if we take out some blood, we put some ozone in it, it interacts with the antioxidants, but it creates all these lipid peroxides and these reactive oxygen species. But when you put that back into the body, it essentially responds to that stress and builds back stronger. So that's a hormetic therapy, right?
So
there's other things like that. Yeah, that'd be sauna, exercise, ice baths. There's a lot of them out there. And those are massively helpful because it essentially engages the intelligence of your own body, which is much better than any drug. So a drug will go in and force something to turn on or off, whereas ozone therapy is a catalyst to engage the intelligence of your body. And so it's causing this stress, which ends up, it depends on the tissue that it's applied to. But for example, in the IVs, helps with immune modulation, helps with energy production, oxygen efficiency, microcirculation. It actually mitigates chronic oxidative stress, which is really interesting because it's an oxidant. But it can be used in all these different ways. And so the stress essentially engages the intelligence of your body. So for example, there was a study done, and there's a couple similar studies to this, but there was one done on cerebral blood flow. And so they were assessing certain parts of the brain that were hypoxic, right? They're not getting proper oxygen delivery. They're not getting proper blood flow. And they would do ozone therapy and assess like, hey, how is the oxygen delivery and blood flow to the different portions of the brain functioning after we do an ozone treatment? And then they tested before as well. But what they found is that the parts of the brain that needed the oxygen delivery, that were hypoxic, they got the boost that they were looking for. Whereas other parts of the brain that didn't need it didn't get the boost. So it kind of looks like ozone is almost intelligent, but it's not. No, it's because it's creating, it's really just a stimulus, a catalyst for your body to be able to do what it does well. So all we're trying to do with ozone therapy is use this stress to engage the intelligence of the body and cause homeostasis. And in one word, if I had to describe what ozone therapy is doing, it would be balance.
Interesting. That's so interesting because I wouldn't have thought of that, right? Because it's an oxidant. It's pro-oxidant. So you almost think, okay, it's going to throw things out of whack. But because of, I guess, the degree, it brings back a certain balance to the system. But talk to me about it as because one of the things that I've heard about ozone, and I mistakenly thought that if a person gets an ozone IV, one of the things that could happen is there could be a cleaning out of sorts of pathogens in the blood. Is that an effect of an ozone? Can that be an effect of an ozone IV, or is that actually not? It's actually affecting the immune system and helping the immune system to deal with the pathogens more directly.
Yeah, it's the latter. So people kind of, yeah. And I know it's splitting hairs to a degree because the outcome is somewhat similar. So there's doctors that, I mean, as far as a layperson goes, but yeah. So like a doctor will use ozone therapy for Lyme disease, for mold toxicity, for even sepsis, like different infections that they can use it for. So people look at that and say, well, it's clearing out the pathogens. Actually, it's not. So the ozone has an extremely quick reaction time. So when you put it into the blood, it's there for less than a millisecond. So the ozone's gone. It's not floating around in your body doing stuff. So that's what I'm saying. It causes this stress response. The ozone is gone. And then your body is now engaged because the immune system is balanced out, and the immune system is able to get rid of these pathogens, get rid of these things in the body that are affecting it. So yeah, it's really truly the body that's doing the work more than the ozone. The ozone is just the stimulus that we use for it. Just like exercise. You want to get bigger muscles. Well, you need a stimulus such as working out.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. So with people who are dealing with whether it's mold or Lyme, like those kinds of toxicities. So assuming that we've removed the source of exposure in the case of mold and mycotoxins, is there a general rule of thumb in terms of how long a person would need to undergo ozone therapy? Is it a one and done kind of deal? I'm going to go out on a limb and says it probably depends, but because
right. Everything depends. So I would say the most common protocols that people are doing is usually 6 to 12 treatments. Most people if they're going to see a beneficial response from it, in 3 to 4 treatments. Some people are like, they get a really good response in one treatment, and that, like you said, depends on what is the causative agent, what did the body need. And sometimes ozone therapy fills that gap to where people do one treatment. And that's why you see some of those testimonies where people are like, I did one treatment and it changed my life. Like the lights turned on and all that kind of stuff. But that is because those people probably had something that had the ozone had more of a direct effect on. But for most people, they will see some sort of beneficial response in 3 to 4 treatments. And then for chronically sick, say stage 4 cancer, they might be doing 30 to 40 treatments. But kind of midline symptoms, you have some pathogens, something to work with. It's a part of a protocol that's assessing multiple angles and going through different things. 6 to 12 is kind of normal.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I was actually, I was on your website, and I love the little blurb that you put beside the ozonated oil capsules. Where you get around. It's a very elegant kind of tongue-in-cheek way of getting around what you can and cannot say. But my question to you is, if ozone has the ability to positively impact pathogens in the gut, what stops it from being a negative for the microbiome? Like so often, things that will clean out the bad players in the gut do a number on the good players in the gut as well. And so we end up ultimately with an imbalance.
Yeah. That's a great question. Almost everybody has that one. So like the ozone enema, essentially, like how does that affect the microbiome and what does it do to the positive bacteria? Because we need those. So essentially with ozone, we're using a pretty small amount. So we are putting it into the colon, and it is killing the good and the bad. It's not selective with that.
Okay.
However, it's a small amount and it's in a confined space. So your gut is really long. It's huge, right? And we're putting it into one area and it has an effect on a few inches. But what you see is there's actually studies on it that they are able to remediate things such as dysbiosis, drinking the ozonated water and doing the ozone enemas. Or like, for example, I did a microbiome test recently, and this was Dr. Mandy LaGreca. She said I have one of the best functioning microbiomes she's seen. And I think what's happened, and I have articles on this that explain it in more depth on the website on drzone.com. But essentially what I think is happening is, yes, it's killing some of the good and the bad in that small local area. But that stress response that the body responds to, it creates a better terrain for the positive bacteria to come back. So that's why it can work with things such as dysbiosis, because it's kind of counterintuitive. You would think that it would just make dysbiosis worse, but it's helping with dysbiosis, Crohn's colitis, different diseases that have microbiome issues. And I think it's because it's creating a better terrain for the beneficial bacteria to take place, and the immune system is more equipped to be able to eliminate the pathogens.
Yeah. So it seems like it keeps coming back to this enabling of the immune system to function better, which is one of the first things you said about ozone at the beginning of the podcast. Was it's not so much what it's doing, but how it enables the body to do what the body does best, which is
and it's like
a fascinating concept, right? I mean,
to me, like I want my body to be for performing well, because that's going to outperform any drug. And so if I can use things, that's why I'm pretty minimalistic in my lifestyle as far as health tools that I use. I use ozone therapy, I use ice baths, I use sauna, obviously exercise, diet, sunlight, good water, good sleep, connection with people. But I think engaging the intelligence of your body to be able to do what it does best is going to be so much better than finding buying $40,000 in all these different hacks and having them in your house and trying to do all those while you're not getting good sleep, not having good connection with your community and those types of things. So for me, it's like a great add-on that just can do this phenomenal thing, which really isn't the ozone itself. It's just your body. And so that's not, like, in my mind, the sexy answer, because I think the cooler answer would be like, ozone is going through this, it is complex, but super complex pathway to selectively filter out and get rid of all these pathogens. And it's like this super, giant immune function type of thing in your body that's killing off all these things. And it's really not. It's just that your body is that smart that it's able to make these decisions once it has the correct inputs, the correct prompts to be able to do those kinds of things.
Yeah. Wow. It's powerful, right? I mean, to be able to find a modality or an element like ozone that actually essentially just triggers cascades in the body that are beneficial is pretty powerful. And it does, from an upstream perspective, it does have the potential to solve a lot of different problems. And to your point, to knock out the need for potentially a whole lot of supplements and other modalities and stuff. So I wanted to maybe get a little bit more specific on some of the things that I just came across. And maybe you can talk to us a little bit about how you see the ozone might be. I mean, you may end up repeating yourself a lot, but let's see if it always comes back to that same thing, because I do want to share with the audience that. And I don't want anybody to walk away from here saying that ozone is going to be the final answer for them, because it could be the one thing that's missing potentially if you've tried a lot of other things. But at the same time, and I would like to talk a little bit about what we were talking about before that is that one of the things that you teach is where other modalities mesh with ozone. So coming back to the idea that ozone is very powerful on its own, but ultimately, especially the more complex issues that a person is trying to deal with, understanding how it may work with other things that will also help that issue, so that you have many pieces of the puzzle leading, hopefully, to some kind of resolution for your issues. So, but one of the areas that ozone comes up in a lot is in dentistry. And now we get into the big bad world of are root canals the work of the devil, or are they a modern day answer to a big fat problem? And it seems to me like the truth lies somewhere in the middle, and the devil is in the details here. And maybe talking a little bit about ozone in oral care, because there are plenty of dentists using ozone in their clinics.
Yeah, well, actually, in
in
the context of dentistry or like skin infections, so you can apply it onto the skin as a gas, or you can infuse it into water and then put the ozonated water onto the skin. Same thing in the mouth, so you can infuse the gas directly into an infected area, or the ozone water, you can swish it, or use an ozone oil, which retains peroxides that are antiseptic and have basically healing capabilities by stimulating growth factor and hydrogen peroxide naturally in the body. But it does have actually more of a direct mechanism with an infection in the mouth or on the skin, because the ozone itself is an oxidant, right? So what it likes to do is it likes to rip apart other materials. So if I had like a latex glove here and I was spraying gas over the latex glove, you would see it just kind of like disappear like a magic trick. What it's doing is it's actually oxidizing that tissue, turning it into a gas, and it's just like breaking it down. Yeah. And so that's also why we don't breathe it. It wouldn't rip your lungs apart like that by any means. You'd cough and have irritation, and you'd be fine. Like, I've never come across somebody that's had permanent damage from it personally. But yeah, in the context of putting it into, let's say, an infected tooth or infected gums, the ozone goes in and actually kills the infection itself by breaking down the cell wall. So it does have more of a direct mechanism. But while it's doing that, it's also, like I said, it's stimulating growth factor. The platelets are releasing more growth factor in that area when they get this response from the ozone. And then it's also helping the skin or the tissue to create more hydrogen peroxide. Your body actually naturally creates hydrogen peroxide and ozone as an immune function for killing pathogens. So it increases that process in those areas, as well as having a direct mechanism into the tooth. So dentists love it because that's probably one of the bigger departments that ozone is used in. So there's the IVs, which are pretty big. There'll be a few thousand clinics adding ozone in the next couple of years with some of these larger franchises and whatnot. But in dentistry, it's pretty widely used because they'll use it for osteonecrosis of the jaw. They'll use it for infected tooth. They have this little, essentially needle. It's not sharp, but they'll put it down into an infected area and just spray the ozone gas in there. And then you might be thinking, well, what about breathing it in? We said we can't do that. They'll usually have a suction or a vacuum at the back of the throat so that none of the ozone is actually going into the lung tissue. Mm-hmm. Or you can use an ozone water, which there's not really any danger of breathing it if you're using ozone water. So they'll lavage the wound or the infection site with the ozone water. And some dentists even claim, I can't verify this personally, but that helps to remineralize teeth. It balances out the pH, the acidity, that kind of thing. And so you can look up Dr. Phil Mullica, Dr. Robert Harris, Dr. Valerie Cantor. A lot of really good dentists are using ozone for a variety of issues.
Interesting. Well, and I wonder if they're using them in a certain fashion to do that, right? To mend, whether it's mending teeth or helping with the enamel. I mean, I would think with the enamel, you also need an actual agent to rebuild, something like hydroxyapatite that I know has come up over the last few years as being more popular, as actually being able to potentially improve the enamel on the surface of the tooth.
Yeah, like I said, I can't verify that for sure. Yes. It's just something that I've heard from a number of dentists. And if there's something that I hear independently from multiple people, I feel like that qualifies to at least talk about it and say, well, this isn't proven, but I've heard this from, say, 30 dentists that have had said the same thing, and they're not talking to each other. So there's got to be something there that they're seeing, and maybe it is within a certain protocol, a certain cocktail that they're using to be able to get those kinds of results. But yeah, on the anecdotal side, usually I won't even talk about an anecdote unless it makes it to that point, which is there's a lot of independent people talking about this, saying the same thing, and I know that they're not in the same group.
Right. Yeah. N of 1 becomes N of 1 times 20 or something. And all of a sudden it's like, maybe there's something here.
Yeah, which it's wild. Like all the stuff I hear about ozone therapy and people using it. I mean, it's one of those areas that I'm continually intellectually engaged with it because there's so much to it and so many different applications. Because I used to, when I would see a therapy and I first got into this industry and this school of thought, was you would see say go to a conference and somebody has some sort of therapy or some sort of supplement that they say works with 100 different diseases or 100 issues, or it boosts like 100 different things. And while that might not be, some of it might be negligible in that it's like really not having a huge effect on that. At the time, it was just kind of a big red flag. Like, this doesn't work for all that kind of stuff. But once you understand that there are treatments out there, and like hyperbaric oxygen, like if you had to put together a list of what does that work for? Well, it's going to be huge, because again, that's another thing, that it's not just the oxygen, it's the stimulus that your body engages, and your more equipped body is now able to fight these diseases better or do these processes better. And it's the same thing with exercise. If I asked you to list out the benefits of exercise, well, there would be a lot. And so it's kind of it's not a replacement for exercise or hyperbaric oxygen or those things, but it's in a similar train of thought that, we're engaging the body. And so it can be used in a lot of different areas.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that's the acid test, right? Is for those things that people claim do 1,000 things. Is it the thing that's doing it, or is it like an ozone or hyperbaric oxygen, or maybe even a PMF that essentially,
or made up,
huh?
or made up,
or made up? No, but is it something that's actually enabling the body at a foundational level to work better, and therefore, from a downstream perspective, you can imagine it's affecting many, many different things? Or, to your point, did they just make it up? Right.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think, certainly at a lot of the conferences we go to, that everybody, it seems to me, I don't think I've met too many snake oil salesmen. Maybe sometimes they're a little misguided or they'll overstate something, but I don't know. I want to believe the good in most people, but
yeah. I think so, but I think also understanding what the likelihood of a certain outcome is, or how much it's boosting something or suppressing something, is really important. Because, I mean, if you told me like, oh, you can take this, I'm making this up, totally making it up, but you can take this ashwagandha and you'll get a boost in testosterone. Well, are we talking about a 0.1% boost or a 20% boost? Because there's 100%. Clearly a difference there. And so if you're considering your time and money and effort, you want to be putting it into the things that are going to pull the biggest levers, right? So you don't want a 0.1% improvement. You want a radical improvement. And so the context of all those things is super important as to like, how effective are they? What is the likelihood of that outcome? And that's something that I would like to see in the space a little bit more, as conversation surrounding that, and, percentages and hard numbers and, studies to verify it too, rather than just saying like kind of a blanket statement of it does this. It's like, well, that's nice, but it's not exactly super helpful to say that it does that, because there's a lot of things that can, boost testosterone or suppress something. And it's really important to understand how much it's going to have an effect.
100%. Well, and I mean, maybe supplement XY, that little percentage of testosterone boost is what an individual needs. Unfortunately, you get a lot of people running to it thinking this is, who really have a major issue. And not to mention the fact that they're going to run to that supplement and miss the part about why is your testosterone low in the first place? And what can you do first to address that, to help to at least clear the way for the body to come back into balance, right? And I think it's part of the human condition that the easy silver bullet answer is always the sexiest one that everybody's going to gravitate towards. And
spoiler alert, it doesn't exist. I mean, that's why that's why the drug market exists, is because it's a play on our psychology, on our biology, is because, like, say that you have high blood pressure or something, and then you take I can't remember what they use for a statin or whatever, for your high blood pressure. And then you almost immediately get an alleviation of that high blood pressure. Well, biologically, your body is saying, wow, that worked really well. Keep doing that. And so it's kind of this positive feedback loop that you're reinforcing with these long-term negative drugs that just give you a quick boost, a quick alleviation of symptoms. And it's tough because you're fighting your own biology at that point to say, no, this isn't the right answer. But unfortunately, yeah, the right answer is usually the one that requires more effort, more work, and more intentionality, because we can't just live a life that it has this poor lifestyle choices, and then expect to resolve it with a pill. And I know that's preaching to the choir because everybody talks about that, but yeah, it's so true.
I mean, it's funny, I mean, with blood pressure, because I think the challenges, and I know this because, I have someone close to me in my life who has had very difficult to treat blood pressure, to the point where they were put on a multitude of blood pressure medications because one wasn't doing it. And sitting from the outside, and I'm not a doctor, but it doesn't take a doctor to say, well, at any point did anybody ask the question, like, if there is high blood pressure, there is a physiological reason why that blood pressure is high.
Yeah.
The body is looking to correct something or to compensate for something, or maybe mechanistically there's something wrong with the blood vessels. But, is there a possibility that if we considered those issues first and try to restore balance from there, that even if you did end up still needing a blood pressure medication to some degree on the other side, you wouldn't need as much, or you wouldn't end up on 4 of them.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And the problem with blood pressure medications is they invariably lead to open the door to needing other medications to mitigate the side effects of the blood pressure. Like, it just doesn't end, right?
That's how it goes. For sure. Yeah. And I mean, the high blood pressure is your body's appropriate response to whatever is going on. And we often think of, like, for a flu, for example, having a high fever, vomiting, those types of things. Those are the symptoms that your body is actually utilizing to get rid of the pathogen. Yep. So if you think about that and you turn those off, well, now that pathogen is just floating around in your body. You've turned off your fever, you've turned off your vomiting, your diarrhea, those things that you're going through to be able to eliminate this. And you're just in-equipping your body to be able to do what it needs to do. Yeah. And so looking at things like high blood pressure through that lens, saying this is the appropriate response, I think is productive, because it leads you to say, okay, so I need to get to the base of this, not just try to mask the symptom, because masking the symptom is going to turn into more issues in the future.
For sure. And look, guys, we're not saying, and I wouldn't say that blood pressure medication is always bad, but it would be great if more questions got asked initially, to see if we can either use less or maybe not need it. And, I don't think that drugs are necessarily all bad. I think that sometimes you need an antibiotic. Sometimes it happens. And that's the beauty of living in this era. But I think the problem, is they've become the go-to solution before anything else. And it's landing us into a heap of trouble over and over and over again. And,
I think the problem is that doctors have turned into drug dealers more than actual and I'm not trying to slight anybody too hard there, but that's really what the system is set up to do, is what is your symptom? What is the drug that correlates with that? Okay, take this. Okay, now when another symptom pops up because we're taking this other drug and not actually resolving the issue, what drug do we take for that that's not going to interact with the other one? And that's how you end up with a country that is one of the worst performing in terms of chronic disease outcomes in the world, behind third world countries, despite spending 19% of its GDP on healthcare, which is, it's so much. It's higher than any other country by far. And we're getting these terrible outcomes because the system is set up in a way that we're rewarded by taking these drugs, and doctors are educated. The drugs are, what you give to people, and the lifestyle is kind of an afterthought. I mean, you can look at hospitals. So people going into surgery, doing different things. What are they given for food? Well, they're given you have chicken tenders as an option. You have coffee with sugar as an option. There was a nurse who posted a picture that somebody going into heart surgery had their empty coffee cup and a couple of sugars that were in the coffee prior to going into surgery. And it's just well, there's something wrong there, because they're saying one thing where it's like, hey, I'm going to give you this drug, but you need to work on your lifestyle. It's like, yeah, but they don't really even practice what they preach. They still just give you access to whatever food you want. that is not good for you, and they don't prioritize healthy lifestyle. The hospitals are not set up to have people like moving and exercising, getting good sunlight, air quality, all those types of things. And so, and I understand it's difficult, right? But healthcare is difficult. So you have to find a way to bring actual healthcare into these situations. And yeah, I guess I'll just get off my soapbox on that. Got a little bit off base.
Well, yeah, no, I think we could talk about that for a long time, and definitely the good news, I think, is over the last couple of years, there has been a growing awareness of people's need to really put their arms around and take ownership of their own health.
Yeah.
So I think that it's percolating. For a while, it was only in the elite, kind of, not even the elite, but just the well-educated, kind of more affluent circles. And I think what's happening now is that anybody, Joe Blow, is realizing, hey, I can make different decisions. And I think in our circle of this biohacking health optimization world, one of the responsibilities we have is helping people to access better health for themselves, not just by spending thousands upon thousands of dollars on technology and supplements and the latest new shiny toy, but helping people to really get their heads around how much you can really get done with lifestyle. And I think that's something that you yourself espouse. You said that earlier, right? I mean, You do have access to Ozone, which is a beautiful thing. But aside from Ozone, I could do a cold plunge in my tub. I don't need a $7,000 cold plunge tub. I could, either use my tub or a big garbage bin, fill it with cold water and dump in a few bags of ice, and there's my cold plunge.
We love to overcomplexify things and make them bigger than they need to be. Like cryotherapy chambers, I think, are an excellent example of that, because you can just use a cold plunge that you can DIY one for under $1,000. If you just look up DIY ice bath, it's a chest freezer, you can do it. But these cryo chambers get up to being over $100,000 to have not even as good of an effect as a DIY chest freezer. And we love to overcomplexify it. We love to make it expensive because it feels better. But it really is about those fundamentals. Like Dave Asprey says he's going to live to 150 or whatever. If he dies at 80, okay. If he dies at 85, it's a scam. Right. And so, like, in my opinion, I know there's like, he's a huge net positive to the world, and that he's bringing more awareness to these tools that are helpful to people and aren't just a drug, that aren't just these things that mask the symptom and actually get down to the root of things. But I think what that's telling me is that, you can have all these tools and all these different modalities and things that you want to do, but the basics always win. And so say all these biohacking things are the 10%. Well, don't lose track of the 90%, because that really is where the money is at. So if you, forego your focus on those things to do, an extra treatment, well, I'm not sleeping good. So and I've gotten caught up in that, right? Like,
we all do.
I'm just going to hack my way out of this because I got to work hard. So I'm only going to sleep a few hours tonight. I'm going to get up and burn the candle at both ends. Well, that just isn't how your biology is. You can't overcome that. And so, I think we really love to overcomplexify, and the more interesting, more attractive things are the expensive things, or the things that are unique or different. And those are netting you some benefit, but not nearly as much as the basics.
100%. And the fancy stuff, to your point, the fancy stuff won't work if you haven't taken care of the 90%. So, so doing that 90%. Okay, let's get back to Ozone, because we we wandered away, which is fine. It was good conversation. So if I came up with, there were 3 words: anti-infective, oxidant, which has therefore an antioxidant kind of effect in the end on the body, and immune regulation, which are 3 really powerful streams of impact on any system, on any biological system, really. And so when we talk about, there's mention of ozone for, and I really don't like the word anti-aging, because we are aging whether we like it or not. By definition, we are aging, but in the land of aging better, and aging, just being healthier as we age. Ozone has its role to play. I mean, ultimately, foundationally, anything we can do to make our immune system better is going to help us to age better. But beyond that, is there more to ozone on this healthy aging front? Or do you think it basically boils down to what we've been talking about now?
Yeah, it has to do with the antioxidant system. So the reason that we can use an oxidant to mitigate chronic oxidative stress, and oxidative stress, so that's an imbalance between your antioxidants and your free radicals that are in your cells and floating all over the place. Free radicals are messaging molecules that are really helpful for telling the body what to do and how to do it and all that kind of stuff. And antioxidants are a very strong protective mechanism. So if you have good antioxidants, you can go through chemotherapy and have less negative side effects and all that kind of stuff. So with ozone therapy, we're stimulating that stress response that actually creates more free radicals, which people would look at that at the surface level and say, well, that doesn't sound good. It's actually creating a mild acute oxidative stress. But what happens on the more global scale or the larger scale over a longer period of time is that your body responds to that by endogenously creating more antioxidant enzymes. So supplementing with like glutathione is a really good thing, right? So it's helpful, cell protection, all that kind of stuff really helps the body to run well. But what's better than that is if you can get your body to create its own antioxidant enzymes naturally, because it's your body creating it, it utilizes it better. And so ozone therapy is doing that. And this chronic oxidative stress cycle is when these free radicals and these antioxidants get out of balance. So they like to stay in this tight loop, like more antioxidants, more free radicals, less, more, all that kind of stuff. So it's trying to keep those two systems in balance. And chronic oxidative stress is when the free radicals get out of control and then they don't know what to do. They're not doing their messaging job and they're starting to throw wrenches into the system, creating premature mitochondrial dysfunction. If people are familiar with that, your mitochondria are the energy cells of the body. So if you delete those, essentially, you have less energy production. But it's not just energy. It's like everything across your body. And so the excess of these free radicals turns into this chronic oxidative stress, which is theorized to be the leading cause of aging and disease at the fundamental level, right? Yeah. I mean, you can say like, oh, you have a pathogen, this or that, but kind of getting down to like, what is the common thread through all of this? That's the most foundational piece. And most institutions would say that it's actually chronic oxidative stress. So if we're looking at that and saying that's one of our biggest, most fundamental problems, and then we add ozone therapy in, which mitigates that process, and there is good studies on it. You should age more gracefully. And so it will have a good effect on it. And it does a lot of other stuff too. So the reason I got into this world is because my brother had brain cancer and he was going through Johns Hopkins, the medical system. Right. And he, at the time we just kind of were, the guy in the white coat knows it all. But his quality of life was diminishing and his critical thinking processes had gone downhill significantly due to open brain surgeries and different things. They basically got to the point that said, hey, we don't know what we can do, but we can do some experiments essentially. So my brother essentially got turned into a stat line for the medical institution. So experiments included, there was this one highly toxic chemotherapy agent that they wanted to give to him. But when you looked into the research, it only worked for 13% of people. The upside did. Everybody got the downside, but only 13% of people potentially got the upside. And that was based on they had to have a certain genotype to get that 13%, to be in that 13%. They didn't even test my brother for that genotype to ensure that he was. I don't know, but it's their job to know. It's their job to know. So I don't know if they knew that or not, but it's like, hold on a second. When you go into the literature, it's saying that this right there, you have to test for a genotype to even see if this is going to be helpful. So that was, and that was just kind of the process of working with Johns Hopkins at that point, which in my mind, that's the poster child of cancer care, right? That's like the cutting edge, the cream of the crop. And I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. They do a lot of amazing work and there's a lot of good stuff there. But as far as my brother was concerned, it was clearly a road of diminishing quality of life and eventual death. And
I'm so
Yeah. I mean, me too. I mean, we ended up actually, he worked with me in ozone therapy for 6 years before he passed. But what let me into this industry was, it was like, hey, is there anything else that could potentially be helpful for Matt and potentially improve quality of life, that kind of thing? And so hyperbaric oxygen was there was this guy at our church that recommended using hyperbaric oxygen, and he had a wife that had some issues. And so he had actually built his own hyperbaric oxygen chamber. He was an engineer.
Wow. Huh? That's impressive.
Yeah. So it was a hard shell chamber, goes up to 3 atmospheres, all that kind of thing. And so Matt started to use that, and it greatly improved his quality of life, like better energy, less nausea, just pretty much all quality of life metrics improved. And it was kind of the thought process was like, oh, damn, like Johns Hopkins didn't even mention this thing that has no negative side effect, but is immensely positive for him. So like, what else is out there that possibly they're not, they don't know about, or they're not talking about? And so that kind of opens up your paradigm, right? Is once kind of that you become disenchanted with the medical system and think, well, maybe they don't know everything. And they truly don't. A lot of medicine, like nobody has it all under control, and the cutting edge really isn't that cutting edge, and like all this, kind of stuff. But like there's a lot of good work being done in the world, so I don't want to diminish that. But I think it opens up your eyes to say that, there's not we don't have all the answers, and they definitely didn't. And so let's look for things that might be helpful for Matt. And along down that road, ozone therapy was one of those things. I had some studies on it that showed that if you do IV ozone therapy while undergoing chemotherapy, 70% improvement in quality of life metrics.
Come on.
Like that's huge.
70%.
Right?
That's massive.
Yeah. And there's good studies on
an oncology team, because my very small experience in this world, only because I had a friend who was undergoing chemo and then would come to me and say, well, what else can I do? And there was literally nothing we could come up with that the oncology team would say yes to. Like they basically threw up the wall and said, no.
Yeah. Their attitude, as far as you're concerned, we're God.
Well, and part of it is that, and I think part of it is we don't know what it's going to do. And so God forbid you're engaged in something that is experimental, because now they don't want to mess up their experiment. And I would sit there and say, well, wait a minute. I've read studies that say that if you fast for 24 hours, and this is simple, like fasting for 24 hours going into chemo, you will actually, it makes the chemo more effective against the cancer cells. It protects your healthy cells, and very often people have fewer side effects from the chemo themselves, like they're less nausea, less hair loss, the whole 9 yards. And the information, the response that would come back is, oh no, you need to eat because you've lost too much weight. And I'm like, I'm all in for that. But if a 24-hour fast can help you not to feel nauseous, and then you can eat on the other side of it, we're kind of ahead of the game. Because it's days of nausea as opposed to 1 day of not eating. And if it might help, so, and I'm not saying that it's the be all end all, but it is, to your point, it's still a little bit disappointing at how closed the current paradigm is to anything outside what they know.
Yeah, I was just talking with Matt Kaufman. I think it was Matt Kaufman. He has the Integrative Thoughts podcast that he does, but I think it was him. It might have been somebody else, but he was saying that with ozone therapy, he essentially made some suggestions to his conventional clinic, and they actually changed some protocols because they did the research and went into what he was talking about. And I was like, that's really rare. Like there's really, very rarely do you hear practitioners actually like listening to the patient, trying to, not just like throw up a wall and say, nope, not interested in that. That's not a part of the plan, but actually do research and look into it. Like that's definitely a needed thing. And I understand like time is a problem. So you can't, read everything, go into everything, but there's a few tools that can be massively helpful for chemotherapy. I mean, methylene blue, hyperbaric oxygen, IV vitamin C, IV ozone therapy. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can do that is really helpful in that. And essentially what they're doing is they're a preconditioning agent. So in the case of ozone therapy, since we're getting that increase in endogenous antioxidant enzymes, it preconditions you for trauma. So they did a study where they had these rats and they had 3 different groups. They had a group that they applied far infrared light therapy. They had a group that they did ozone therapy. And then they had a sham group, which they didn't do anything for. And then they would induce heart attacks into the rats. Oh. And with the group that did ozone therapy, the heart function afterwards, and they do an autopsy and like look at the heart, have like different, things that they look up. But the heart function of the rats who did ozone therapy was almost normal. And as opposed to the other ones looking exploded, like it looked like just this slab of meat that exploded. And I have that in some of my presentations with pictures that goes through everything, goes through the study and all that. But it's really impressive what some of these treatments can do as a preconditioning agent to help you go through different traumas. And that could be chemotherapy. That could even be something just like a car accident, like your body being more equipped to handle those things.
So it builds almost like it builds resilience into the system on a bunch of different levels.
Yeah. I mean, just like exercise, we're super familiar with that idea is like, yeah, if you exercise, you're more capable of handling stress and trauma and different things as opposed to if you don't. And so that's a concept that people are already familiar with, but just haven't attributed it to the idea of vitamin C or methylene blue or ozone therapy or hyperbarics.
Yeah, I find methylene blue also, I find all of these things super interesting. Obviously, I think they all have a place, but methylene blue, the problem with it, I think the biggest problem with it is it's blue. And, I had some methylene blue delivered to my parents in Florida just because it was easier to get it there. And then I would pick it up. And then I told my mom and dad, don't open it. Just wait until I tell you what to do with it and how to do it. And my poor father decided he was just going to jump the gun. No idea what this stuff was and dumped a dropper full into I don't know how much water. And I think if you mention that day to my mother, she will still melt into like gales of laughter because the look on my father's face.
Yeah.
And, his teeth were blue. His mouth was blue. The glass was blue. The sink was blue. Everything was blue. He was horrified at the taste of this stuff. I got a text saying, you must send this back. It tastes awful. I don't know what it is. Your father's going to be blue for we don't know how long.
Yeah.
And so now on the back end of that, I'm trying to explain to them, but it's really good. And it's antibacterial, like it's antimicrobial and blah, blah, blah. And great for your mitochondria. Nobody wanted to hear anything from me anymore. This was now banished to the things that Nathalie sends us that clearly show that she's off her rocker and we must be cautious. I think.
Just trying to transform everybody into a Smurf. That's all I'm doing here. Okay.
All I'm trying to do is make you blue. But you'll be alive in blue.
Yeah. And methylene blue is kind of like a newer trend. So, I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done on that front. But even high vitamin C, like there are millions of treatments have been done with that. There's a lot of really great research on it. And so, I think there's some of these things that could be adopted and they really should be.
Well, we're getting there. I think, with people like you and some of the doctors out there, I think one of the issues also for clinics adopting a lot of this stuff, particularly in Canada, I know that the medical boards are very not flexible and not very open to people bringing this kind of stuff into the world. But without going down that rabbit hole, because there's no point right now, we had started at the beginning of the conversation before we even started recording. You were talking about some of the set because you host teaching symposiums, and you were talking that one of the ones that you have coming up is you're talking about how HBOT, like hyperbaric oxygen therapy, can work with ozone therapy. Is that correct? Or you're just talking about hyperbaric? So maybe do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I know there's a lot of listeners who've accessed hyperbaric oxygen therapy for a number of different reasons, from anti-aging to dealing with different neurodegenerative diseases or traumatic brain injuries or whatever the case may be. But then bringing ozone into the picture, how does that work? Do they work together? Are they used sequentially? How do they kind of interact? I mean, it's all around oxygen.
And I'm going to be one of the guys learning at the training event too, because I just kind of host the business side and facilitate the connections and get the teachers on board and all that kind of thing. But yeah, so I mean, my understanding of it is that they're extremely synergistic, but there are some differences. So in the case of traumatic brain injury, if I had to choose one of the treatments, I'm 100% choosing the hyperbaric oxygen. Yeah. Like it's just better as far as traumatic brain injury is concerned. If I'm looking at an infection, I would choose ozone therapy. But where do these two kind of cross paths is that they're working on similar pathways. They're both creating the reactive oxygen species and the lipid peroxides in the blood, in the system that the body is essentially getting a little bit stressed out from and creating that beneficial response. But yeah, you like in a clinic, they might use IV ozone therapy before doing a hyperbaric oxygen treatment. So do the IV ozone therapy, get in the hyperbaric oxygen, and that might be a treatment protocol. And so this guy, Dr. Ryan Myers, who's going to be teaching at this event up in Salt Lake City, he's going to be talking about his protocols that he uses. And he does, what's the hyperbaric oxygen protocol where they're doing like, 50 sessions in a month or 2 months or something wild?
Is that the anti-aging one that they did in Israel?
I think it was, based off of a study, but it's pretty intensive. And so he's using the IV ozone therapy as a complement to that as well. And so it's used, they can basically just be run in tandem. Anytime you're doing one, you're able to do the other. I think the biggest limitation is time and money. So what does somebody have the capability of potentially doing? And it depends on the issue that you're going there for. So if you could only choose one with your time and money or resources, it is going to depend on the indication. So if you have the traumatic brain injury, like I said, I would choose that. If you have an infection, I would choose the ozone. But yeah, they can just be run in tandem indefinitely.
For sure. Well, actually, that's even understanding that, right? Like that, while they're both complementary, and if money was no object, both would be beneficial. If you had to pick one, then there'll be different indications for each one. You're looking for microbiome or gut pathogen support, that kind of thing. Probably the ozone applied properly is going to take it over the H-bot. I mean, H-bots might be helpful, but it's just less of a direct hit. So in terms of people accessing ozone as a therapy, so, if I go to your website, you're selling medical grade devices. So people need to be able and willing to make a significant investment. What are your thoughts on, there are ozone supplements, which I know you also market as well, but then there's also these little home ozone generating devices that I think they come in around, I don't know, maybe around $200. So they're relatively affordable. And they sometimes come with insufflation kits that, whether for rectal insufflation, or you talked about vaginal earlier, in terms of giving that stimulus to help that biome kind of reset. It's almost as a reset. What are your thoughts on the home devices? I mean, obviously the medical device is going to be better, but not everybody has a few $1,000s to spend. And maybe it's not appropriate for everyone to own a high level medical device. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll get into that real quick. I would say if you're considering ozone therapy and want to understand it, it is a little bit of a learning curve because you're using a gas and most people aren't used to that. So an hour or two is usually all people need, but you do need to say, I'm going to sit down for an hour or two and get my head around this and figure it out. But really from there, it's pretty easy. It's something that takes a few minutes a day and you're set up for the rest of your life. And so our website, drsozone.com, is an educational site that's all about ozone therapy. There's a guide that you can download on there that walks through everything. And that's a really helpful resource if you're trying to kind of see what's what and what is, all these different applications. Because if you just go to a product website, it's covering things from dental to injections to aesthetics to the IVs to the home use and all those different applications. So it can be a little bit overwhelming just to look at the product side. So get the guide. That's really the best way to get started on it. But as far as you were asking about what's the difference between different machines on the market. So essentially there are laboratory or medical grade ozone generators that run on oxygen tanks. So they require pure oxygen in 99.9%. That can be commercial or medical. Like they're the same thing. So there's commercial oxygen that doesn't require a prescription. You can go to a supply shop and just pick that up and it's good to go. Or you can get medical, which requires a prescription. And there's a little bit more bureaucracy involved with that because you have to get a prescription. And then a lot of times they want to rent it instead of sell it to you. So most people just get the commercial oxygen. But so what's the difference between like a medical laboratory grade ozone generator and one that would make ozone water? Is that kind of your question?
Kind of. And because the Ozone Wonder one also, and certainly in the marketing of it, they will say we also sell insufflation kits. And so we will also, I mean, they're generating ozone gas. But yeah. I'm guessing that the concentration and of the gas that you're able to produce from a little machine like that is very different than what you can produce from a more industrial machine.
Well, I can't speak to the one you're talking about because I'm not familiar with it. So, but I can say that I haven't seen what appears to be a good like medical grade machine out there for IVs and insufflations, the ozone enemas and that kind of stuff for under $1,000 or close to. I think there's one out there that's like $950. Mm-hmm. The other ones are usually just like they were repurposed ozone generators that are typically used in like aqua tanks, so like fish tanks and that kind of thing, right, as a disinfectant. And they're usually just repurposed versions of that. And a lot of times they don't have medical grade components in there. So like I said earlier, that ozone is very reactive and wants to break things down. You have to be really sure that your machine isn't breaking anything down. So like the ones on Amazon that you can go get, they'll usually have non-ozone compatible materials that are essentially creating contaminants, microplastics, micrometals into the ozone gas, and then that would be going into the water or whatever you're using. However, I would say that if you're using those machines work perfectly fine for making ozone water and then pouring it onto a wound, or, you know, putting your hand in it or whatever, that kind of thing. I think they work great. And if that's all you want to do, that's definitely the way to go. That's what I would do because it's less expensive. It's super easy. They just use room air. They're not using an oxygen tank, so you don't have to bother with that. But they're really kind of confined to like the limb bagging. So that's when you have like, say, an infected wound or a diabetic ulcer. You put that into a special bag that's made from ozone resistant material. Mm-hmm. And you infuse the gas in there and it helps to kill off the pathogens and speed up the healing response and all that kind of thing. So they work really well for that. But I definitely, I don't know the machine you're talking about, but you do want to make sure that they're using laboratory grade materials inside the machine. So there's only a few components. There's a small list. There's like Teflon, silicone, 316 stainless steel, 310 stainless steel, quartz glass, certain titanium alloys. And there's even a difference in alloys. So the reason that you could use, say, like 316 stainless steel as opposed to just like your kind of cheaper stainless steel is because there's a part of the alloy is chromium oxide, which is an already oxidized metal. So when the ozone is up against it, it's an already oxidized metal, so it's not going to oxidize it further. And so that's why it's ozone resistant. Same, the quartz glass, Teflon, the silicone, all that kind of stuff is good to use. But that's usually the biggest differentiating factor between what you would find on Amazon for like $100 and like a few of the ozone therapy companies that are out there.
Okay, well, that's actually really good information because it's important to know what questions to ask, right? And I think just giving people that information is very valuable because they can look it up.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to make this like, I always get annoyed when people are like, oh, you're just making a thing that sounds like you're the only one that you can buy from. That's not the case. There's a few good companies out there. You can go find them. I'm super biased. I think we're the best. I've worked really hard at it. We're one of the only companies that's exclusively focused on ozone therapy and doing a lot of work in that space. So we've tried really, really hard to make it super good. But yeah, there are other companies that you can get from. And so I think the important thing is just to, look into it, see if ozone therapy is something that's going to be helpful in your world. Maybe it's the chemotherapy, maybe it's Lyme disease, maybe it's like an optimization thing. We didn't even get into some of the optimization portions of it, but it had some really interesting studies surrounding that.
Well, we have a few minutes. We can do
Oh,
that.
sure. Yeah. So there was a couple studies that have happened in the last year. They were both on semi-pro athletes from different countries. I think one was Israel and one was Turkey. I can't remember exactly the country, so don't quote me on that. But they were doing IV ozone treatments on semi-pro athletes. So all similar lifestyle for the most part, right? I mean, some might be eating a little bit less healthy than others, but for the most part, they're doing similar training. They're of a certain caliber, all that kind of thing. And so they had, in one of the studies, they had 80 of these people. 40 didn't do ozone therapy and 40 did. And they were both on the same training program. So each group had identical training that they were doing. And they were looking at what's called anaerobic threshold. So when you're jogging, when you're running, you're aerobic up into a certain point, and then you switch into anaerobic metabolism, which is less efficient. So you're building up more lactic acid and you're creating less energy. So if you're doing a stamina sport, you want to stay in an aerobic state because you're producing more energy. It's much more efficient and all that kind of thing. So they're looking at anaerobic threshold to say, hey, how long does it take for somebody to transfer into the anaerobic state? And what they found is the group that did the IV ozone treatments, they had an 18% improvement in anaerobic threshold, meaning the window was pushed up by that much. And that was for treatment that you have to do. And the other good thing about this study is you kind of got to see how many treatments you have to do and how long it takes before it returns to baseline, because that's not a permanent thing. It's 4 IV ozone treatments every 2 months, gets that results. And I think it was about 76% of the athletes. And there was another study that was done that was actually similar, which kind of verified this one because it was by a different group, a little bit of different methods, but they also did IV ozone therapy, and they were looking at VO2 max. So VO2 max is the amount of oxygen that you're breathing in. It's an indicator of how well you're actually utilizing oxygen. And they found a 28% improvement in VO2 max. And I think it was 68% of the athletes that did it. So it's not everybody got that big of a boost, but it was quite significant and over the control. So they're doing, in that one particularly, they're doing the same training program. So the control group that wasn't doing IV ozone therapy also got an improvement, but it was only 12% as opposed to the 28%. So again, that was a really nice thing to see. But what does that mean for people like every day? Well, if you're an athlete, it's kind of obvious. You're going to tire out less quickly. So your anaerobic threshold is going to be higher. Your VO2 max is going to be better. So you're not going to get as fatigued as quickly. And it's pretty noticeable. You don't want to do it the day of. You want to do, if you're doing IV ozone therapy, you want to discontinue it 2 days prior because you are creating that stress. So you might feel a little bit more gassed the next day, but you should come out of that stress stronger and be able to perform better just 2 days prior. But yeah, so the athletic improvement, but that also equates to like brain fog and fatigue. And so they've done studies on chronic fatigue syndrome. They've had massive alleviation of symptoms just using IV ozone therapy. It's, I think, 52% improvement in symptoms, which is just one tool. And there's a lot of things that you can do. So that was pretty exciting because you have on one side the athletes that are getting optimization enhancement, or they're getting performance enhancement. And then on the other side, people who are sick and just aren't getting proper energy production also have an improvement in their symptoms. And it doesn't get down to the base of the problem in that context, but it was pretty helpful for people. And it does help with the oxygen delivery and the microcirculation and the nutrient and gas exchange that needs to happen on the cell level. And so those are kind of some of the things that people can expect in terms of optimization amidst the antioxidant enhancement that we talked about for aging.
Well, and I think also with not the athletes, but the people on the other side with the brain fog and the chronic fatigue, sometimes for those people, if we can find a way to bring energy back to the cell and energy back to the system, it's almost like it gives them a little leg up, and it can help these healing cascades to kind of take hold a little bit better in the context of other things that they're doing. So in and of itself, it may not be the one thing that made them better, but could it be something that just brings more energy to the system that allows them to take another step towards resolving whatever their issue is? And, you know, I'm sure with the chronic fatigue and the brain fog, depending on what the cause was of it in the first place, you probably have longer lasting effect and shorter lasting effect. And somebody would have to take the time to peel that onion and say, okay, in this population of people, if we did X number of, it's, you know, if we start to slice the population, I feel like in a lot of these studies, we like to take 300 people and see what happens. But a little bit like what you were talking about with that one cancer therapy, where if you selected out the people with a particular genotype, this one chemo might have been the thing that really helped them versus everybody else. Well, now this could be a chemo drug that could be really helpful for a portion of the population. Similarly with the ozone, if there's a certain presentation of whatever the factors are that led to the brain fog, in certain instances, the ozone therapy might really be a game changer for them on a longer term basis, or not. But again, we have to ask those questions, right? We need those, whether it's doctors, practitioners, or researchers, to be willing to kind of take out slices of the population to see who's getting helped and who needs something else, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a tool definitely worth knowing about, just like a lot of these tools that you probably talk about in this podcast. But
yeah,
it's one of those ones that it's really good to be aware of because it can be used in many different aspects. So you can use it on the skin infections, as well as the Lyme disease, as well as the adjunctive cancer chemotherapy agent. And so I think it can just be used in so many different aspects that it's well worth taking some time to get an understanding of what it is, even if you don't use it. There'll be a friend or a family member that does.
100%. And so one thing on your site that is very accessible are the ozonated oil supplements. And so those are primarily for ingestion. I was wondering, can they be pierced and then used topically as well? Would there be an effect there, or is the oil a bit of a problem?
No, like we have the ozonated oils for skincare are on the website, and those are the primary purpose of the ozone oil. Yeah, so those are on the site, and that's the primary purpose. So diabetic ulcers, skin infections, that kind of thing, they're really, really popular for. You know, I would say for like, we used to try to do a little bit more with like acne and that kind of thing, because that's what everybody's interested in, is more the aesthetic side, but that's really not where they shine. I mean, go to Young Goose Skincare or whoever it is that you recommend that, you know, is really good. And they're going to have better skincare products for aesthetics. But as far as skin infections, non-healing wounds, diabetic ulcers, scarring, it's helpful for scarring. So if you have surgery, apply it every day, a couple times a day, and the scar will be greatly diminished from that. And so that's really where it shines, is in those instances. And that's where it can be massively helpful. So we do have the ozonated oils on there that work for that. There's also the capsules. Those are more for like stomach infections like Helicobacter pylori or Giardia.
Yeah.
And so it's mostly used for that. People kind of think, oh, is this ozone therapy in a pill? No, it's like a stomach infection thing or a gut infection. And there is anecdote on people saying that it helps with like not food allergies, but food sensitivities. So if, like, say you're going to go out to eat at a restaurant and it normally bothers you when you eat at that restaurant, if you take these prior, again, this is anecdote, I've just heard it like 100 times, is that it diminishes the negative response that people get from that food that typically would irritate them. So that's the ozonated oil capsules. But I'm constantly learning and growing. And so it's like the ozone saunas, I'm not huge on those still, but they're, at least for the first time ever, was a little bit of research that indicated there might be a systemic response from it that benefits the whole body and not just the skin. Because I had a little bit of a fight with people that had ozone saunas for a while, because like, they would say, oh, it's just ozone therapy IVs, except you don't have to do the IV. And I was like, there's zero research on that, right? There's nothing to equate these two things. And like I want to believe that too, because it would be way easier, less invasive, and overall that would be a better treatment if it could do the same thing. But I've kind of come around a little bit to say, like, yeah, there is some stuff on it, and I need to be more open-minded because people do get good response from it. I still wouldn't, there's no research indicating that it does the same thing as IV ozone therapy, but there is some saying that it might create a systemic response. And so they're just looking at biomarkers that are created by IV ozone therapy, doing an ozone sauna and saying like this affects some of the same biomarkers, but to the degree we don't know, to the effectiveness for different things, we have no idea. But yeah, all that to say is that I'm constantly growing and learning in the field of ozone therapy, which is exciting for me. And so maybe these ozonated oil capsules have more, they definitely have more purpose than just that. It's just we don't know about it yet because it hasn't been researched. And so people use them for all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, no, for sure. Have you seen them used for psoriasis and eczema, like those types of skin conditions? Because I think there's some literature on ozone and psoriasis and eczema.
Yeah, it can help with the flare up, but that's about it. So it's not like going to resolve the eczema, psoriasis. So, but yeah, as far as the inflammation that comes from those things, it can be a little bit helpful to that. But honestly, there's, a lot of good products for that. I think the ozone oils are good if you have them. I wouldn't use if you tried a ton of other stuff and nothing else has worked, I would give them a shot. But there's probably a lot of other areas. Like Young Goose, I think is one of the best. I think it's the best skincare company out there. I'm sorry. I hope you're not endorsing a different one.
I love Young Goose. No. I mean, I think there's a couple of good ones out there, but Young Goose is at the top of my list. People know that I can't stop blabbing about them. If it's not the hyperbaric mask, it's something else. So
yeah. And I'm massively impressed with Amitai, just a tremendous human being. So they have a really good company, but they have some NAD stuff that's really good. Helps with inflammation in the skin too. But yeah, it can be helpful, but probably wouldn't be the first thing that I would go to.
Okay, awesome. All right. So as we finish up, Micah, why don't you tell us a little bit about your world? Like just your own health protocols. I know that obviously ozone is your business. It's your life. So ozone is a part of it, but, tell us what else, maybe tell us a little bit about what else you feel really brings you to your best expression of yourself that you practice on a daily basis. And you've alluded to a few of the things during the podcast. So
yeah, I'm kind of annoying because I don't have like the coolest routines and the like all the coolest stuff and the hacks. I'm kind of a minimalist in some ways. I have a lot of overhead and then I have multiple businesses. I have, office building, properties, all that kind of stuff. But like all my clothes, I can fit into a carry-on suitcase. I drive, a pretty crappy car. And like, so I keep pretty low overhead as far as like my personal life. And yeah, as far as like health hacks that I do or different things that are helpful, it's also kind of falls in suit with that it's pretty simple. As far as exercising, I exercise with what I have access to at the time. So most of the time, since I'm busy, it's a 40-minute workout where I just get after it with body weight stuff as hard as I can for 40 minutes. And, I'm just dripping sweat and it's very difficult. And then if I have access to bumper plates and that kind of thing, I'll be doing some of the Olympic lifts, like the clean and jerk and the snatch. And so it just depends on what I have access to. I like to do a lot of different fitness styles. And then I'm a big fan of ice baths and saunas. I like the elements. I think those do something different to the body. They're a stress response that the body responds to and does really well off of. I know Dr. Mercola has denounced ice baths recently, but I'm still a big fan of them. I think they're very beneficial. It got rid of my asthma. I wasn't even looking for it to do that. It just did. And then I was like, oh, dang, there's something to these. And then I got kind of into it after that. But yeah, and I, on my Instagram, I went viral on ice baths for a little while. So I have tens of millions of views on the ice bath stuff. So a lot of people know me for that now, even though it's not an expertise of mine, it's more of just a personal interest. And then saunas, I think, are tremendous. I just think that's something that everybody should have is some sort of heat therapy, sauna therapy. And so if I had to choose like one thing that was more of a tool and not just a lifestyle thing, I would say sauna for sure. I think it's just tremendous what it does for the body. Getting rid of all that buildup, getting rid of stuff in your body, creating some heat shock proteins. I think it's just really tremendous. So yeah, those are kind of the two things that I'm into. And then working outside, being in good sunlight, getting good water, getting good air quality, really big on community and creating community with people, whether that's in my professional life or personal life. Like that's a really big focus of mine. So yeah, not a whole lot of like interesting, expensive stuff. I used to have a lot of things that I just sold off of and downsized, and have kind of gone back to the basics. And I don't even take much for supplementation. I take a few things, but not a whole lot.
Yeah. Well, good for you. I mean, I think we go through different phases and waves in life, and finding what's working for you now, and not getting sucked into all the cool stuff all the time, and being open to the possibility that down the road, for whatever reason, there might be something else you need to integrate.
It's very true, because I'll have different needs in the future.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that we often forget, is that you don't need all the things all the time at this very minute, but be open to the possibility that what you're doing today won't necessarily be the thing you need to do tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Our bodies are fluid, and we have different needs as we move through our different stages of life, and even based on the inputs coming in from the outside. So I do love this minimalist approach, though. It sounds very peaceful to me.
Yeah, I wish it was as peaceful as it sounds. It's just life is so busy. And so, yeah, I mean, doing business and managing relationships, it's a lot. And I tend to, anytime I have a little bit of freedom, I go on these sprint walk cycles that you alluded to earlier. And so when I have a time that's a little bit more calm, and I'm, only working 50 hours a week or something, it's like I take that space, and it just becomes very vision oriented. And then there's a lot of vision. And then that means there's going to be a lot of execution and implementation in the future. So I've done that to myself enough times to know better, but I still keep doing it. So
I think the world is a better place for it. We all get to benefit from those visions of yours, Micah. So you're doing something right. All right. Well, tell people where they can learn more, find out more, where they can find you if they're a practitioner looking to access some of these trainings that you're doing, because I know you're ramping that up over the next couple of years. So where
and I mean,
more?
We do free online trainings every week for practitioners and patients. So you can go to drsozone.com and get access to the live Zoom calls. And those are just group calls that we train on it. And we also have courses. We have a lot of different ways people can interact with the information, if they prefer to read, if they prefer to watch video, if they prefer live calls, if they prefer phone calls, texting, whatever. Because it's like, to bring this to a more popular space has been a lot of work. So we have to create access to information in different mediums for people. So that's why we have so much. But yeah, the best way is drzozone.com, drsozone.com. A lot of really good articles on there. I still need to upload like 80. I've been saying that for like 6 months. I just have them on the back end, and I haven't completed them. Well, I mean, they're pretty much done. I just need to finish them up. I've written thousands of pages on ozone therapy. So it's a lot, but yeah, the drzozone.com is the best place to go. And again, that's drsozone.com. And then my personal Instagram is Micah for Health, all spelled out. And that's more me. So it's just like whatever I feel like. Sometimes I feel like posting, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I post twice a day for a month, and then I don't post for 3 weeks or whatever. So, and it's all over the place. Like I like to journal a lot. So I take some of those entries and I actually just put them up there. And it's kind of, those don't get much exposure, but it is more raw, I guess. But I don't have to feel as vulnerable because only 10 people see it. And then the ice bath videos, millions of people see it. So it's like all over the place.
There you go. All right, Micah. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a pleasure and a great conversation. And I look forward to our paths crossing again and learning more.
Thank you so much. You're a great host and really just amazing person. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.